Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we have another episode in our series of podcasts, and I am joined by Candy Day. Slightly different from the last few, we are doing this remotely, but the format is the same and the focus is the same. So let's dive straight into it. Candy, welcome.
Thank you, and good to meet with everyone.
Thank you for making the time. And I want to start just to, before I forget, this is a very free-floating conversation and also interactive between Candy and myself. As audience, feel free to ask questions. There should be a Q&A section that you can use. We are not able to answer your questions during the chat, but after about 40 minutes or so, we're going to go through those questions. So as they emerge, please send your questions in. And that's all I wanted to say before we start. Let's maybe just, for the audience, paint a picture of you, Candy, what your role is within the DGMT. What is DGMT and what is Hold My Hand?
Super, thanks very much. So first of all, DGMT, or the DG Murray Trust, to give them more full name, based in Cape Town but working nationally, is a strategic investor and a public innovator. So it's much more than just funding projects or pieces of work, but it's very much around guiding the strategy and the focus areas. And DGMT has three main goals, one of which is to build an innovative and inclusive society, so very much about bringing innovation to kind of wicked social problems. Secondly, to get all children on track by grade 4 as a particular milestone, but that's very much looking back right to the beginning of when children start their journey of growth. And thirdly, to set all young people on track. So a big emphasis on adolescents as well as youth, and to try and make sure that they have opportunities to succeed well. So it's very much built around the premise that if we invest early in young people in the country, that this will give a maximum benefit to society as a whole, and to improving outcomes for the country at all levels. How Hold My Hand fits in. Hold My Hand is a national campaign that has been the result of some years of consultation between the presidency, the DG Murray Trust, and a broad group of government, civil society stakeholders, as well as actually children themselves. And through this, they've been working over a number of years to identify what are the key challenges and issues that are holding children back, because children are not, on the whole, doing very well in our country. And so there's a real imperative to accelerate action for children. And so there's an agreement, a MOU, between the presidency and the DG Murray Trust to establish this accelerator, which has been established now, to fast track the design and the development of key interventions that especially require public-private collaboration. And hopefully most of the people on this audience will have seen that the end of last year, Cabinet has actually approved this national strategy to accelerate action for children, which is a strategy providing a framework and guidance in which identifies 10 key priorities, and alongside those 10 key interventions, which are felt to bring the most potential to improve the outcomes for children. So there's obviously many, many things that are needed for children to do well. And this is not just about health, it's about all of the domains and the nurture and care framework, the adolescent wellbeing framework. These are global frameworks that our country has adopted. But these 10 priorities are ones which require a lot of intersectoral collaboration. They often require the inputs of multiple government departments and coordination of those departments, as well as recognizing and harnessing the contribution of civil society. So especially non-profit organizations, networks, collaborations, and of course the private sector as well. Yeah, so that's what the accelerator is. So it's really just a small team of people, of which I'm one. We have different functions within the accelerator, one of which is around strategy and building programs. One is around networking and mobilization. The other is around communication and really building the public face of the campaign. And then the information and data, which is the part that I represent, is obviously like a key cross-cutting thread in a way to inform the work and to, you know, feed into how we design programs, what needs to go into communication, and building information systems and networks for mobilization.
Okay, thank you. So we have a good understanding of Hold My Hand as an accelerator hosted by and curated by DGMT. Where we come in has everything to do with the data, but before we talk about the specifics, can you maybe explain a little bit more why data plays such a central role in the Hold My Hand initiative, or what does it mean that data is so important? What's the role of data?
Sure, thanks. That's a really good question. Everything really about this national strategy to accelerate action for children, which is the framework within Hold My Hand operates and supports, is evidence-based. So this is not just about initiatives and interventions that are popular, but it's about having determined which interventions are important through a whole process of consultation and interrogation of existing data. Some of the interventions are things that are difficult, which is why they are priorities now, because they're often things that haven't been solved yet for children. And therefore, it's also very important not only to use existing information to inform what we need to do, but to recognize and identify gaps in information. And part of the data role in this project, the part that's, or one of the parts that's really challenging, is to think about how can we fill some of those data gaps as well. So where information doesn't exist, or it's inadequate, or it's out of date, how can we envisage and design new systems, firstly, that will enable a much broader participation of multiple partners and stakeholders to contribute to this, but also to get alignment on what exactly we should measure, how we should measure it, what tools might exist. But invariably, global tools need some kind of adaptation and contextualization to the realities of our specific context in this country. So there's a lot of work as well in working towards new information, new data sources that will continue to inform the new interventions and ultimately, obviously, how we are tracking on those and whether they are leading to better outcomes for children.
Can you give an example? You said some things are really hard, some things are difficult, and that's why they are the priority. Can you give a very practical example of something that is this hard? And then also, can you give some examples of data? So what are we really measuring? Are we presumably we're not measuring kids' marks at school. That's, I'm guessing, not what we're measuring. What are we actually measuring, and what are some of those very hard problems?
Sure. So I think we can actually start with priority number 1 of the 10 priorities, which is to strengthen families and enable parents and caregivers to care for their children. Now, that might sound to many of us who are either parents or have some interaction with children not to be a very difficult thing. It feels very intuitive, but it's difficult because from a national perspective or from a government perspective, this is something that happens largely in homes. It doesn't happen in a school environment or even necessarily in a health facility, although it has some touch points there. So this is something where we need to think about how that whole section of the life course of young children, starting from even before birth, from pregnancy, but especially in those early years, the birth to 3 years space, is what support are parents getting to ensure that their children thrive? And, you know, as I mentioned, this covers all of the areas of the nurturing care framework, which is a good framework which highlights all of the areas that need to be in place for a child to thrive, which include good nutrition, good health, but it also includes things like early learning opportunities and responsive caregiving, which is how parents and caregivers interact with their babies. So those are some of the areas that are not nearly as well measured. So some of the health interventions are more structured in terms of health facility information systems. But this whole area of how we support parents, how do parents interact with their children, and are those interactions responsive and giving children the best chance? And then how do we measure outcomes in those very small children? So there's an excellent example in South Africa with older children, so preschool children, and this has been like the work of the last 10 or 15 years, is the Data Drive 2030, in collaboration with a number of other partners, have developed the ELOM tools, and these are used to produce a measurement called Thrive by 5. And this gives us a really good national picture, but also enables all of the different programs providing early learning services to measure the impact of those early learning programs. But in the 0 to 3 space, there isn't something like that exists. So firstly, the service delivery to support parents and caregivers is quite informal, and it's through a sort of fragmented somewhat network of organizations. Actually, they're not all networked. That's part of the problem. Some of them are operating in networks and some of them are operating more in a siloed way. You are providing support to parents, but we don't have a really good picture of the comprehensiveness of this, the quality of it, and what the impact of it is, because there isn't a standardized measure in this country. There are some globally, but it's like a very fuzzy area still that's not well designed and requires a lot of contextualization because of language issues, cultural issues, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about one of the areas of integration that we've worked on with you to start finding solutions towards that sort of a challenge.
Thank you. So I'm hearing in certain domains, not only is the intervention incredibly complicated, but also then to measure whether it's working is not straightforward. And in many cases, we don't know because it hasn't been measured in a way that can be surfaced to public. But besides the general fact that sometimes data just isn't there, what other types of data problems have you encountered since you started in this role to try and map all the activity, all the network of networks, the evidence of what's happening, how well is it being done, what's the impact? So there's so much, but can you speak to besides, okay, well, this is not being measured, what else was a problem?
Sure, no, absolutely. I think the myriad of challenges has been quite extensive. So one of the challenges to start with was that we were really starting from a fairly blank slate, in the sense that this was a new initiative. And although it builds on a lot of the work that DGMT has been involved with for many years and with many of the partners, for the specific work envisaged of the accelerator, there was really no information system whatsoever. So the first challenge was simply taking the high-level vision and priorities of the strategy and unpacking what does that actually start to look like. It's also that this is not like one organization with a focus area or a specific intervention. This is now orchestrating and partnering with a wide group of people to tackle multiple strategies and interventions in parallel. And it's not just about the intervention at a grassroots level, it's also about mobilizing the network. It's also about building the programs, and it's also about a highly visible public communications campaign that can also start to make all of these aspects of the work visible at multiple levels to the general public as well, parents, caregivers, and everyone in the country, really, to try and get them behind supporting this campaign and the priorities of it. But it's also a broad network of partners, as well as government and the presidency and all of those people. So yeah, there's very many moving parts, there's many different audiences. And then, drilling into the data aspect, as I said, starting really without particularly having systems in mind, but needing to think about mapping the network, building a system that could facilitate communication and engagement with that network, tools to be able to collect data, being able to manage a sort of M&E type of aspect to the system. We also needed to manage references and literature, because all of this work is evidence-based, as well as we are publishing policy briefs and outputs from the work. So that is another piece that needed to be plugged in. And of course, it's very important to be able to visualize and work with the data. So we also need to have, dashboards and tools in order to be able to start visualizing and sharing this content as it develops.
Thank you. So our relationship in this Hold My Hand project goes back to end of 2024. Can you refresh our collective memory and share with the audience where you were in that challenge of collecting, managing, analyzing, visualizing, communicating data at the time that we had our first coffee, which I think was maybe October 2024.
Yes, around then. So at that point, I would say we mostly had, we had a lot of ideas, which we had brought together through consultations within our team, and to some extent with external experts, partners, and stakeholders, to try and define as best we could what it was that the information role should be able to produce. I think it was always clear from the outset that this was going to be a moving target. So there was quite a clear vision at a high level of what we should be able to achieve with bringing together all of these types of data and building systems to manage them. But in many cases, the specifics were not yet mapped out. So we had to try and work with you and your team to define that in a bit more detail, which is why we started after a couple of conversations and sharing some slide decks and some ideas and working through comparing different options versus the requirements. We then did do a business requirement specification process with you, which was for you to interview the members of the team and those directly involved, and to try and get a holistic and as well as nuanced understanding of what this whole information system should be able to do. Put that into a document and use that as a guide to the work that could next be undertaken. So that basically formed our planning and our outline. But what's been really valuable from that time is actually building that out into a working system. There's a great diagram which guides us in terms of the high level sort of architecture of the system and the building blocks that go into it. And then we have, as you would know, of course, the regular sprint reviews and documentation as the system builds out and the various pieces come together. And then as we have different priorities or new sections of work, then we'll have an intensive consultation about those and figure out a way, the best way to work with those. So and there's also mechanisms that we have in place to enable those regular connections and interactions to make sure that we're on track, but also a responsiveness to troubleshoot with issues and challenges, as well as a component built into expand the capacity of our team, which is very small. Up to now, it's been mostly myself. As you know, we've recently have Sibangaseni, who's joined us as a data administrator to support, with actually working with the data. So it's really been quite a holistic approach, I think, in which your team have supported with designing and building out this network of data systems, as well as providing technical support along the way, especially for the more complex technical challenges and making sure that the back-end aspects work and all of the integrations, while also building the documentation and the capacity so that we are able to, as far as possible, manage a lot of the system ourselves within the team, and even bring in some of the other team members to be involved on some of the information systems to greater or lesser degree. That way it becomes part of a common thread throughout the project, so that everyone's invested in maintaining, contributing data, checking out for data quality, and also contributing to the vision of what might be possible and how we might do things better. So also just to say that because a lot of what we were trying to do wasn't defined in a lot of detail at the beginning, there have been times when we've started on a particular trajectory with a tool, for example, and then found that that tool really wasn't serving our needs, and then we've been able to have that discussion, review the pros and cons of different options, and pivot to a different part of the solution. But it still feeds into the same high level vision, as this is just about like plugging something in or taking something out.
Yes, thank you. So thanks for sharing that. I want to do three things. One is I want to quickly reflect on one of the phrases you used right at the start, and I frequently think back to it, and that's the idea of a thought partner. And that's what you asked us to be. You asked, do you see yourselves being a thought partner to this project? And it was the first time I heard anyone use that phrase. And I think that was a really, really meaningful and valuable way of phrasing it, because it wasn't, can you guys build an implementation of SAP, or can you hook us up with an instance of some cloud vendor? That wasn't the question. The question was, we have this complicated, chaotic, multi-pronged system that we know we need, but we struggle to articulate exactly all of the bells and whistles that it needs to have. Plus, we have constraints in terms of budget and time and internal capabilities. Can you help us figure it out, knowing that neither of us have done this before, and we're going to have to work together and communicate really well? And I think that was both an incredibly big challenge, but also a beautiful opportunity. So I'm very thankful and grateful that we were able to do that together. And as you, I think, have just described, it has been very much a dialogue where we work together, we try things out. Sometimes we say, yes, this is working, and we proceed. And other times we have to conclude that licensing challenges or feature limitations or maybe scaling limitations mean actually this sounded good, but no, this is not it. Let's do something else. So that's the first one. The second one, I wonder if, Jody, if you can share this diagram. So in terms of the architecture that you alluded to, quite early in the project, we created this image that we have been using over the months to confirm that we are on track, and to also keep ourselves on the same page when it comes to what are we actually building and how does it all hang together. And that brings me to the third point, which is maybe we can just touch on some of the components and the functions that the system requires and required. So for the audience, I think this is very hard for you to read, and that's maybe not a bad thing. So we really don't want to get lost in the details, but we want to give you a high-level overview of the conceptual picture, the framework of this data architecture. So my best attempt would be, you have two handfuls of tools and platforms and apps that are being used to capture data and to store data. Some are being used, for instance, to send off surveys to your the organizations and the ecosystem to ask questions or to make sure. So there's a CRM, there's a survey tool. So that's to collect and store and organize information from all of those organizations that jointly make up this ecosystem of services for children and teens in South Africa. But then there's other tools that are used for communicating to the general public. So there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn. Then there are internal knowledge management tools like Google Drive. I think there's WhatsApp as well. You also alluded to the need for a tool that can manage citations in a way that you would use if you wanted to write a scientific paper, or you're working on your PhD. So that's also a tool there. And then, so that's sort of at the top level, all of the places where people create or curate data. And then it all comes together to this central node, which is BigQuery, and that's Google's database solution. That's where we can create these curated data tables that may or may not borrow information from all of those sources above. And then through BigQuery, we can create these fit-for-purpose data sets that we can analyze. And that analysis then translates into views that are visualized via a dashboard solution. I think this is not the most updated visual, because we started with Looker Studio as our dashboarding tool, and now we've swapped that out for Tableau. So I'm not sure if Tableau is there. It might not be. But so that's my narration of this picture. Candy, I don't know if you want to add anything to this.
I think you've given a really good summary and overview, but yeah, this is great. And I mean, a lot of the work initially went into the integration with comms, because the communication campaign is obviously a huge part of Hold My Hand. So having those automatic integrations with the social media channels to help keep the team on top of what's happening, and also through HubSpot and the CRM type of tool to manage as new partners join the community. So managing, you know, a lot of those interactions, it's really powerful that can be integrated and be used across one system to another, so that it all starts to talk to it talks to the whole system, and it also helps us to have much more of, you know, I think in CRM speak, a sort of a 360 view of our contacts and of our partners, and to understand how and where people are involved in interacting with the campaign. And this also allows us to kind of work across all of those audiences, both the public, parents and caregivers, as well as partners and NGOs and professionals working in the space, and also government. And also, you know, there's a degree of beyond South Africa, international partners, and that you can also fit into this and be part of it. Yeah, and it also links to the newsletter and to the webinars, which is also very helpful. So not the specific webinars, but the webinars that are run by Hold My Hand and other partners. So it's really been, I think, beyond even what we'd hoped would be possible in terms of being able to bring these pieces together. That's really been very useful. And now, since that part of the system has been developed, now we're focusing more on bringing in the programmatic data. We've done one big survey, which is just about to be released and launched around the birth to 3 space and the parenting support. But we now have a stronger M&E type of tool that will be really useful now as some of the programs actually start to be implemented, those which we are more closely involved with the actual implementation aspect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. So the last thing you said reminds me of this duality and challenge that we often face. In the world of software as a service, you have this, I don't know, incredibly big ecosystem of software solutions, usually software as a service with a monthly subscription fee attached to it. And certain tools promise to be really good at one thing and one thing only, and other tools have decided the best way to capture the market is to have everything under one roof. And so a CRM might say, yes, we are a CRM, but you can also use us to organize surveys, and you can also use us for internal auditing and for dashboarding, and I don't know what else they have. And so you might be maybe some monitoring and evaluation within the CRM. So as a consumer or as an organization needing all of those functionalities, you need to decide, am I picking one tool that does it all, or am I combining 4 tools that might be superior in each of its niches that it's chosen to master? And in some ways you can't win, because if you pick one tool, then you're choosing mediocrity almost inevitably, but at least everything is together in one coherent system. If you're picking 4 tools, then maybe you have 4 really good features that work great in isolation, but no one cares about integration and bringing it all together. So that, I think, is my attempt at making sense of what we've been doing for the last year or so. So that is sort of the part of the decision-making process is, are we going for this very complicated web of tools that are great on their own, but now we need to solve the integration problem, or not? And we've definitely chosen to focus on modular a modular approach rather than a monolithical approach where we said, let's find the one tool that is on average decent at everything. That's not what we've done. I think the advantage of going the modular approach is that when the market evolves, and in a few years from now, WhatsApp is no longer what it is now, it's reasonably easy to swap it out. The same for the CRM. We've made a particular choice. We've made a choice of a dashboarding solution. But if the one that we've chosen becomes inaffordably expensive, we can swap it out with something that is now more affordable and does an equally good job, for instance.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think we've experienced that even in these choices, where some tools have proven to be really good at a particular aspect, and we've sometimes used a single tool like the CRM, for example, for doing multiple functions, and then found that it really had strengths, but also a lot of weaknesses for some. So then by the time you reach the end of that process, you realize, you know, this wasn't an ideal configuration of tools. We had to work through it, for example, with the survey. But going forward, we decided, well, the CRM is really powerful for these functions, but it wasn't very helpful for other purposes. And then, as you say, bring in another tool. And I must say that's been really powerful, the number of integrations that have been possible, and for the most part, how well that has worked and enabled us to join together completely different systems so that we avoid capturing the same sort of data in multiple places. Because especially as something like this scales and grows, we have to try and build in smart ways of using the information and the data so that it's not down too much to individual effort to curate and clean and check all of this. So as far as possible, we have to try and build it to be able to scale.
Yeah. So you've been the super user of the system, closest to the design and closest to the immediate testing and usage of it. By now, some other people around you have also been onboarded and have started using some of the components. Can you summarize their feedback? How have they experienced it?
Sure, yes. So as you say, it has been a gradual process, and we've onboarded others of the team as we had familiarity with the tool, and once we'd got it to a degree of maturity that it was kind of ready for that sort of use. So I would say that the tools up to now that have been the most useful have been the reference manager, the citation manager, Zotero, and the CRM. So people have used that really a lot, as well as, I guess, the integration like between the CRM and the webinar tool and with the survey. So that's been generally a positive experience. It has been a challenge because of the CRM being a not an open source tool, so the license implications have been quite challenging to try and how shall I say, the tool is most useful when the majority of the team are invested and engaged on the platform and are using it in their daily work. But that does come with license implications, and it also comes with implications when you want to expand access to partners who may not be directly inside the team. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, which we recognized in picking a tool that has license fees, and that's applicable to most tools in this space. I still think overall it's good value for money compared to trying to build this sort of functionality, you know, from scratch or something like that. And one certainly benefits with using these tools, which are largely online, but as their innovations and as their changes and improvement, that, you know, immediately filters through. So yeah, it's been generally a good response to the team, and it's also been helpful that the work that Wim does in the background helps to create a more sort of user-friendly interface for the most part for the team to interact with. We have had some sections of the work where the steps in the integration have been a little more complicated, and those, how shall I say, cost us quite a lot of time and learning curve in terms of a particular choice of tool for the survey. But yeah, it's we've innovated along the way. The team have found solutions, have found ways to work with the challenge so that we could at least proceed with the deliverable and then plan a slightly different trajectory going forward and, you know, bring in new solutions. So it's been very much a learning as we're going and using that learning to improve the overall design as we move forward.
As we're wrapping up, I want to ask you, now that you've walked this road quite far, for audience members who recognize themselves in Hold My Hand and in the challenges of managing and curating and analyzing and communicating these disjointed pieces of information, what would your advice be? Do you have some wisdom that you, if they are now where you were a year and a half ago, what would you tell them?
What's probably the most useful and important aspect is to try and map out, it doesn't really matter whether that's on paper or in a presentation or a document, what your requirements are of the system. So even if it's not necessarily specified in technical language, but to try and understand what you want the system to be able to do and to specify as much of that. I think that probably caused us the most problem, the areas where we had like a very high level vision of what we wanted, but not a clear understanding of what that would involve and you know, all of the requirements up front. Because that informs obviously which are the best choice of tools and how things should work together. I think the other thing is to be willing to fail fast. So if you realize that there is a problem with a particular aspect of the system, to raise that quickly and to decide on how to pivot from that. I think there have been some areas where we've done that well, and other areas where we perhaps took too long trying to make a solution work, rather than saying, actually, we're missing something here. There's something that we need to change. So yeah, I think the good communication, regular check-ins, and keeping that alignment between what you need to achieve and what the capabilities of the different tools are. I think it's helpful not to be too set on a particular solution or technology, and I've appreciated that in the Vimy team there's a pretty broad range of experience with different tools and different solutions. So quite a few times we would say, okay, so which is the best tool for this, and then we would work together on a pros and cons of different tools and the costs and the implications, and that was very helpful. So there wasn't a feeling that if we had to work within one technology stack or one, as you say, one platform only. The team has definitely been quite open to a wide variety of options, and I think that's been helpful, and it's been enabled us to move forward and not get stuck on a sort of predefined solution.
Great. So I think, thank you. So one related idea is the challenge, the human challenge of the sunk cost, that we feel invested. We've gone this far. We now know how to work with it, and it's not great, but at least we've learned quite a lot along the way. And then it's very difficult to let go, give up, and start from scratch. But sometimes it's worth it. And so when is it worth it? It's worth it when the gains will surpass the investment, even the thing that feels like wasted effort. So if my sort of commentary would be, try to get it as best an understanding as possible of all the features and all the use cases, and who will be the users, and is it 2 people or is it 20 people, and how will it grow, will it stay the same, and so on. But also think through the life cycle of this tool. Is it just for the next 6 months, or is it for the next 6 years? And if it's for the next 6 years and it's likely to grow, then it's fine to make a mistake and undo it within 2 months, because you'll have 6 years to get your money back, so to speak, or to extract value from the system. So having that long-term perspective and then making decisions from there, I think is helpful to build the thing that will have that longevity in it. On that, maybe my last question would be, now that DGMT and Hold My Hand have this system, do you see any avenues where it could be used as a starting point to expand? So either you could clone it and say, just like Hold My Hand needs it, there's this other initiative that also needs it. Can we copy paste it, so to speak? Or variation to that same ideas, can we strip away some things or add some things, and then it becomes more useful for this additional use case?
Yes, I think a bit of both in many ways. So I think already we are taking some of the pieces of the information and sharing that with partners to be able to use and reuse. Once the dashboards are more publicly available as well, we've designed those to be very much open for people to reuse the data, so that they would be able to download or, work with any of the basically information that's available, public information, to encourage reuse and application of it. And then we very much are invested in building this concept of open networks, which, as you know, you're part of also that journey of discovery that we are wanting to kind of extend from even just what the CRM has allowed us as a starting point, but into creating a much more dynamic and easy to interact with network that will enable partners to be part of the network and contribute to the network and get value from the network. So, in a sense, that's a direction that we're heading in and building more into. And the idea around that is very much that, yes, Hold My Hand would orchestrate that process with the support of me and any other partners needed to provide that infrastructure and to build that platform. But the idea is very much that the rest of civil society and government and partners who are working in this space would be able to use, contribute, and get value from this network of information and resources as well. So that's very much the vision that we're building to. Definitely our approach is that everything we do, we try and make it as publicly available, as reusable, that applies to, the products, the communication, but equally to the information systems. I think as they mature and become, more of it becomes publicly visible than is currently the case, we very much, welcome any reuse of anything that we've created as part of this campaign. I mean, we really see it as a public good. And so anything that is helpful for the rest of the, of the network to support their work, it would be very much our intention to enable the reuse of components of the system as well as the content in the system.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of this episode, and I want to ask Jody if we can go through the questions if we received any. Okay, so in the Q&A, do we have anything in the Q&A or not? No. Yeah, I asked it right at the start, but okay, so let's go through the chat. We've got one question. Okay. Let's see. By changing tools as you go along, are you not at risk of losing data that may have been captured by a later tool as compared to an earlier tool? Okay, that's a great question. I don't know, Kenny, if you want to go first.
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn, for that question. I mean, there's always risks, I guess, when you change tools, but one always does it in a stepwise approach. So when we have changed tools, we have brought a new system or a new tool on board and then go through a data migration process. And obviously, the earlier you do that, the better. And by trying to remain true to your kind of data model and data integrity, by using things like relational tools and by using the integrations between the tools, that's how we have sought to, minimize any loss of data. Yeah, so, I think it definitely could be in general a risk if you change a tool and there isn't a clear migration pathway, but in all of the cases, I think where we migrated Reference Manager, and that was not a problem because there's a standard. It always helps if there's standards for exporting and importing bibliographic information. And then in terms of the network mapping, we had started with one tool, just really initially exploratory in terms of capturing that sort of information. And there was, I must admit, quite a time cost in migrating that information because it was structured in a conceptually different way from how a CRM works. But fortunately, we did that relatively sooner than later. So yes, it's actually a very valid question and one has to be aware of, but that's where I think it comes back to the failing fast process and having the strong integration within the system so that if you do swap out one tool for another, you know that you have mechanisms of, importing into the new tool, or, making sure that those alignments and relationships between different parts of the data remain valid.
Yes, we've also swapped out the cherry on top, so the final layer of communication. We went from Looker Studio to Tableau, and some of the work in building those graphs inside of Looker we had to then redo effectively in Tableau. So yes, that time costs indeed is sometimes not avoidable. But I think, so if you swap tools out further downstream, that's generally less of a problem because it builds on trusted data higher up. Whereas if you change the tool that captures the data and now it's being captured completely differently, then all of the things that depended on that particular format now has to change. So changing something upstream has downstream consequences. Changing something downstream is therefore easier. But Candy, your point of doing it earlier rather than later, I think is very important. And it comes back to the idea of, is it worth it given the life cycle ahead of itself? If it's only going to live for another month, maybe just deal with it. If it still has 10 years ahead of it, then worth it. Okay, I'm not sure if there are any other questions. If not, I'm happy to close a few minutes before the hour. And then I want to thank you, Candy, for sharing so freely and so eloquently. And I want to invite the audience to join us next month again for another episode where I'll be speaking to the Chief Medical Officer of a company that uses AI and big data to promote and accelerate the quest for more health and more well-being. Thank you, everybody.
Super. Thank you. And thank you for partnering with us.
Great. Thank you.